All right. I don't know if I like old teacher, but veteran teacher I certainly can live with. How's everybody doing today? Good, good. Well, you know, we handicap ourselves. I want to do a little quiz, a little pop quiz. Here we are at a university to demonstrate what I mean. So the first question in this pop quiz is the following. Communication breakdowns sometimes can be fixed. Raise your hand if you would agree with that statement. Okay, lots of hands go up. All right, let's try another one. We need better communication in many of our organizations. Raise your hand if you would agree with that. Okay, good. Let's try one more. You know, my marriage, my friendship, my relationship of whatever kind would probably be better if only we had better communication. Raise your hand if you agree with that. Okay, good. So everybody failed because the answer really is false. The answer is false because these questions suggest a completely different way of thinking about communication than the one that really is going to be effective for improving ourselves as communicators. And what I want to do today is update our thinking about communication so that we can improve the degree to which, increase the degree to which we're competent, increase our effectiveness in our relationships and organizations. And what I'm going to be giving you as a sort of a takeaway is 4 what I call iron laws of communication. And these iron laws of communication are simple to remember, easy to follow. All you have to do is just take them seriously and act accordingly with them. Well, let's talk for a moment about those concepts we just heard. Let's talk about, for example, a communication breakdown. How can a communication breakdown occur? How can communication be broken? Is communication a device or a machine? Yeah.
I didn't know where you opened it to.
Oh, that's all right. Yeah. Here's our question. I'm going okay. So communication is not a device or a machine. Communication is something other than that. We can't touch communication. So if we can't do that, how can it be something that breaks down the way that an engine might? Or that some kind of mechanical or digital device might. Communication is something other than that. Think about when we talk about bad or good communication. Communication is so complex, so multifaceted, that to even think in terms of good or bad almost makes no sense. It's easy to think about a bad meal, a bad haircut, a bad ball player, or a good ball player, a good movie. We can think about those kind of things that way because they're easy to break down into their constituent parts. But communication is much more complex. In common usage, what we usually are meaning when we say communication is we're really usually meaning effectively or ineffectively sharing or exchanging information. So I mean, think about how you know, we do or don't exchange information effectively in our marriage. That makes a lot of sense. We do or we don't exchange information effectively in this organization. Or on this team, we do or we don't share information effectively. All that makes a lot of sense to us when we hear that, and that's because that's usually what we're saying when we talk about good or bad communication. So, as I said, communication is not a thing. It's not a commodity. We could think of information as a commodity, but communication is not. It's not an object. Instead, it's a process. And that's the heart of what I want us to talk about today. Communication, first of all, is a process, and it's not separate from any human involvement. What I mean by human involvement, well, an organization is a human involvement, a team, a relationship, a marriage, a friendship. All of those are what we generally might refer to as a human involvement. And communication can't be taken from, removed from any of them. Instead, communication is each of those involvements. We say communication constructs the organization. Imagine a team, and then imagine the absence of anything that you might think of as communication. You literally would not have a team. It would be a non-existent entity. So communication is that which constructs these social interaction phenomena, and also the process revolves around what we call the construction of meaning. Here's what I mean by that. Think about the following analogy that a thinker named Kenneth Burke offered. He said when people communicate, what really happens is it's like they enter a party. And the party's in progress. And you sit down in the living room and you kind of take in what's going on, and then maybe you put your oar in the water, you say some stuff, and people say stuff to you, and eventually you leave, and the party still goes on even as you have left. Well, what's happening to you is you come to that party with all of your prejudices and preconceptions and lessons and experience, but so is everybody else. And what's happening is you're trying to figure out with the people that you interact with. You're trying to figure out what you can agree on in the process of having a conversation. So what happens is you construct meaning, and sometimes you may give up before you construct meaning effectively with someone. That's certainly true. Sometimes you may not want to try to do that, but certainly whatever's happening is this co-construction, this shared construction of meaning. And just imagine, in the military, what does a hand salute mean? A hand salute generally means respect for the person who is above you in the military hierarchy. Well, a journalist named William Broyles tells the story of going to Vietnam as a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps in the late 60s, reporting to his unit when it was in a rear area, not on active patrol duty. And he met his radio operator named Hoechst, and Hoechst would not salute him. And Broyles tried to assert his authority and say, you got to salute me, I'm going to punish you if you don't, and he would punish him and punish him. Finally, Hoechst said, sir, he said, I really don't mind saluting you. He said, but if I get in the habit here, I'll salute you in the bush. And then the enemy is always watching us out there. Charlie's always got his eyes on us. They'll see me salute you. They'll know you're the guy that they have to kill, and that's going to send the whole platoon into disarray. So he said, I just as soon not get in the habit of saluting you. So suddenly the meaning of a salute translated from a sign of respect to a dangerous activity that could lead to everybody's demise. Or think about this. Let's say that anybody in this room wanted to create an art museum. How'd you go about doing it? You'd probably assemble some art. You'd talk to someone who already had some art. You'd put together a proposal. You'd go to a funding agency. Well, in the new Moscow Design Museum that's going to be opening very soon, different process completely from what we assumed. What happened was that a bunch of artists in their 20s were sitting around in shabby studios, drinking and talking, telling each other about their dreams. It led to a discovery that all of them agreed on the shared meaning of old Soviet design. It was interesting, it had some historical importance, it had a kind of a funky, sort of odd cool about it. So they decided we're going to create a design museum. And they talked with sponsors, they talked with prospective sponsors, they talked with everybody they possibly could so that as many people as possible were sharing the meaning of a new design museum. And the design museum actually opened just a few months ago in 2012, and it had to a very positive reception. I want to share with you the iron laws of communication that will make this practical. The first iron law is respect your tools. What do we mean by that? Well, I'll tell you a quick story. I got a Christmas present as a kid. It was one of those Handy Andy little boys' toolkits. My uncle gave it to me. He was a carpenter. And I also got a drum that same Christmas. And I immediately pulled a hammer out of the Handy Andy toolkit and started banging the drum with the handle. And my uncle jumped up. He said, that's not what you do with a hammer. He said, a hammer is for two things, driving nails and removing nails from lumber. He said, don't use it for something it's not meant to. And he said, respect the hammer, respect your tools. I didn't understand what that meant because I was too young. But as the years went by, I did. And in the context of communication, what that means is we have all these tools. We have eye contact, we have spoken language, we have facial expression, we have olfactory, sense of smell, communication, information. We have all of these tools, and the fact is we underutilize and underappreciate them. We don't realize that all of these tools can be used to construct meaning with others in our interactions with them. Iron Law 2, there's two levels of meaning in every message. So every time you use a tool, there's two messages going on. One is a content level, it's called, and that's sort of the information exchange piece, what you want someone to know as a result of communicating with you. But every single time you use a communication tool, you are either building or destroying a relationship. You're contributing to or diminishing the relationship you have with that person or that group with whom you're communicating. So the second iron law is to remember that every time you make a choice as a communicator, you are at risk of jeopardizing the relationship, or you're in the position to enhance the relationship. Number 3 iron law. There is no such thing as good or bad communication. There are only effective or ineffective choices as a communicator. And you may think, well, I don't have the luxury of choosing how I communicate. Well, actually you do. Many times you may have a knee-jerk action that you take that we could call communicative action. And if you had been more respectful of your tools, maybe you would have actually made a different choice. So respect your choice, respect your tools. Realize that every time you use them, there's a content and a relationship level, and think in terms of effective or ineffective choices as opposed to good or bad communication. Final tool, the response to your message tells you what the meaning was. You may go into a conversation with all sorts of great ideas about what something's going to mean, but the meaning only gets discovered in interaction with others. I'll give you a personal example of this. That cup there is an enamel cup, and I lived and worked in Asia for a number of years. I'd actually been a professor for about a dozen years. Prior to that, I had about 20 years in organizational development. So about 6 of those years, I was overseas. Part of that time, I lived in Japan. Happened to travel in China, where in those days, what you did when you traveled in China, the first thing you do is you got yourself an enamel cup, because there was hot water on all of the different trains in China, all of the different organizations. All you did is get your cup, get a bag of tea. You can make tea wherever you are. It's a pretty good deal. Well, I thought that was pretty interesting, pretty cool. And I thought, when I go to Japan, pulled out my cup, brought it to the office. I figured that everybody's going to see this cup and they're going to think I'm so cool. What happened was something different. Every time I'd walk around with my enamel cup, people would sort of snicker or smirk. And finally, after a couple of weeks of this, I asked one of our interpreters what's going on. And she said, well, Weber-san, they think you have tuberculosis. Because in Japan, these enamel cups are used only by people who have tuberculosis in hospitals, and they spit into them. So when people see you walking around with your cup, they're not thinking how cool you are because you've been to China. They're thinking you've got a cup full of spit. So the last thought I'd like to leave you with is actually I'd like to define communication really briefly. We've talked a lot about communication. We haven't actually defined it. I want to give you a couple of ideas about how to think about communication from now on as a concept. The first definition I developed in conversation with my mother, or as a result of conversations with my mother. She's now 96. She lives in she's fairly mobile. She's cognitively sharp, but she's elderly. She lives in an elderly person's facility. And whenever I go to visit her, her friends are always saying, now, what is it exactly you teach? And I say, well, I teach communication at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. And they'd say, what exactly is that? So finally I came up with a definition, 3 words, that really is easy to understand what I teach. I teach the process of managing mutual responding. So if we're entering that living room where the party's going on, what we're doing is responding to each other again and again and again and again. And what I teach is the process of how to manage that so that you can make the good choices by respecting your tools and being aware of content and relationship levels of meaning. But the last definition of communication I want to leave you with is actually the one that for me is my favorite. And that's one articulated by someone named John Durham Peters. And he said that communication is the name we give to all of those practices that all of those actions, all of those choices, all of those activities we do, because we can never be one another. I can never be you. You can never be me. You two may be very close. You may have known each other for decades. There's still occasionally going to be some surprises when you talk with each other. No matter how close you are with someone, you can never be the other person. And communication is something that has evolved to enable us to, we hope, overcome those differences, to enable us to make sure that if there are surprises, they will more often than not be pleasant ones. Enjoy the day, good luck, and remember the 4 iron laws.